The word was that they'd caught Al Capone, the vile gangster from but not just alcohol did he run. He ran guns, he ran everything, women, child trafficking, the whole thing. One of the most disgusting human beings that we had in America at the time. Nobody could catch him, not the Marshal Service, not the police, none of his buddies ratted him out. Somehow, the IRS caught him in tax fraud, and they were able to arrest him. How does this seem to you? Hey, Al, you owe tax. And he goes, I'd better turn myself in.
Tell us how Al Capone ties into taxation, because I know that he does, but I don't really remember why or how. I just remember that it's the reason why they tried to make him famous, right?
Well, he was pretty famous without
infamous. Right.
Yeah. During Prohibition, when, some people don't remember that it was illegal for you to have alcohol for many years. There was a constitutional amendment that said that it's called Prohibition, the Prohibition. And so America became dry.
It did. My family, my great-grandfather was a whiskey runner in a place called Whiskey Flats, Texas. And because he was a whiskey runner, it made my grandfather into a hot rod builder, because they would strip out all the weight from the vehicles to outrun the law. And eventually, what most people may not know is that they were running in the riverbeds, the flat, dry riverbeds of Texas, and that became NASCAR. And so really, car racing in that kind of way came from the Prohibition era. So, and my grandfather went on to be a really amazing classic car builder, specializing mainly between the 20s and 48s. And so that's made me a lifelong car girl. So I'm very grateful for Prohibition, because we would have missed out on some of the most fabulous, most beautiful designs you've ever seen. So, but yeah, there's my history lesson about NASCAR and car customization. So,
I didn't know that. That's amazing. Mm-hmm. One of the other cool things that we got out of Prohibition was speakeasies.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Yeah,
That's
these little secret places. There's a place in Southern California in LA called Vitello's, and it's across the street from one of my favorite restaurants, which is Aroma Cafe. And it's a nice little restaurant, but in the back, behind the special locked doors, and you got to pull the book on the bookcase to get it to open up, is a speakeasy. And a speakeasy was a secret place where people could drink, and there was all bootleg liquor of all kinds, but everybody would dress up super nice, and they would show up in their niceties, and it was very upper class kind of thing. And if you ever go to Vitello's, you can schedule, I forget the name of the actual speakeasy, but there's a bunch of them in LA too. And there's a few here in Nashville. So, it's a fun thing that they would do to avoid the law. And, this is in the 20s, the mid 20s or so, and even in the teens. So Prohibition was a thing. But before that, there was no tax. We didn't have tax. People look at the West, every now and then you'll see a Western movie and they're like, oh, I got to pay my taxes. I mean, unless it's property taxes, no, you don't. And even then, you probably didn't have to. Tax didn't show up until the mid teens of the 20th century. Like 1913 was when we had the Federal Reserve Act, and then the World War I, which is the late teens. And in the Constitution, the president has the right to call for a state of emergency and call for a tax that has no representation. So the Constitution says no taxation without representation. You have to have the people vote and say they want the tax. And so the president, though, can say we're an emergency. We need to fund the government. And this is before they could go print money. All the money was locked to gold and silver. So if you wanted to go print money, you had to go mine some gold and silver. So it was all locked. So that means that there was almost no inflation, because you couldn't just go print money. Money kind of stayed. There was inflation, but that's because they're mining it out of the gold and silver and putting it into greenbacks and all that stuff. So the tax showed up from the first real tax showed up because the president goes, we got a world war to fight. We're going to have to tax people. And we're talking about a tax of like 1%, 2 tops. That was bad. Rich folks paid 2, the poor folks paid 1 or less, and very few people had to actually pay. But it was enough revenue to keep it going. Once the war ended, obviously they also was the creation of the Internal Revenue Service to be able to collect. But once the war ended, they disbanded the tax from the executive order because there was now no more a state of emergency. But they kept paying tax because it become an annual habit. Oh, you better pay taxes. Well, some people stop paying and they're like, isn't this over? Why are we paying taxes? There was a 1040 form back then. And they're like, why are we doing this? And then like, we got to keep this tax thing going while the Federal Reserve starts up. And so that we can start printing money and eventually go off the gold and silver standard, which they did in the 50s. But around 1930s, 1933 is when the big taxation movement really started up. And we started seeing taxes in the 3, 4, 5% and even going up for rich folks. And everybody's paying tax now. And at one point, the word was that they'd caught Al Capone, and the vile gangster from but not just alcohol did he run. He ran guns. He ran everything, women, child trafficking, the whole thing. One of the most disgusting human beings that we had in America at the time. And they said they caught him, but nobody could catch him. Not the Marshal Service, not the police. No, none of his buddies ratted him out. Somehow, the IRS caught him in tax fraud, and they were able to arrest him. How does this seem to you if you think about it? Oh, somehow they said, hey, Al, you owe tax. And he goes, I'd better turn myself in. What? No, I'm sorry. That's not possible. Why would he do such a thing? He'd be like, okay, shoot him fingers. Tommy gun, 45 caliber rounds and a cartridge coming out at 100 rounds. No, they're mincemeat. So it's like, let's go to the other place. Meanwhile, let's stop by John's Pastrami and get some sandwiches. Fingers. So, it's like, this is so ridiculous. So there's no way that went down that way. Now, I'm sure somebody eventually caught up with him. I don't actually know what the real truth is. I don't think anybody really does. So, but it was a propaganda piece. Everybody was afraid of Al Capone. Oh, Al Capone, going to come get you. They might be careful. Take a stray bullet or something. If they could catch Al Capone, what could they do to you if you don't pay your tax? And that, even when I was a kid in the 70s, they were peddling those wares. Oh, but the Criminal Investigation Division and the special agents, they didn't have special agents in the 30s. I mean, maybe they did, but they weren't like, Navy SEALs showing up. You're talking about the Pinkertons, who were the greatest, who ultimately became the Secret Service. The Pinkertons were the greatest bounty hunters on the planet. They couldn't get him. How is a bunch of IRS guys going to get him? Come on, people. This is propaganda to get people to continue to pay tax as we have. And now you have to ask the question, why do you pay tax? Who told you that you should pay tax? Did you learn it in school? Did you take a class on taxes? No, your dad told you. Your grandfather told you. Your brother told you. Somebody goes, well, you better pay taxes. Oh, how do I do that? Well, you just go to here and fill out this and do that. Oh, okay. Otherwise, you get into trouble. Well, what kind of trouble? Well, Al Capone. Oh. Now, of course, they have a whole bunch of other stories that they love to peddle around this. But really, now we're all kind of looped into the tax situation now. But really, if we're to look at founding fathers things, we're not supposed to pay tax. Now, somewhere, I think it was 1930-something, when the 16th Amendment came in, which said that, oh, yes, well, you do have to pay tax. And it doesn't actually say that, but it's enough of a stamp of approval that, from a federal government perspective anyway, that everybody has to pay tax. Now, what the real truth is that very few of the states in the union actually ratified that amendment. So it's actually technically on the federal books, but very few states approve it. Isn't that interesting? So really, the 16th Amendment got just enough votes in all of the houses to get it approved, but the states have not generally ratified it. Nevertheless, we keep paying taxes because that's what we're told to do, but that is never a function of wealth. It's never a function of the intention of the founding fathers, and certainly not a way toward liberty, and certainly ridiculous to consider that by paying taxes, we're benefiting the country. Not when, after the Reagan report in the 80s, discovered that the money that you pay to federal taxes, by and large, goes nowhere goes back into the treasury and is erased. Why wouldn't it be erased? Because the government pays for itself from the Federal Reserve, not from the treasury, for the most part. All of the money that they're spending comes magically out of a bank, a reserve of some kind, with no ledger, no accounting, and no actual place where things or assets are held. They're just generating money. Mm-hmm. And doing so for over 110 years, 112 years. So why do our taxes mean anything? Well, I'll tell you, it goes to the treasury. They wipe it out. And now there's billions and maybe even $1 trillion a year out of the money supply, which brings inflation down. Mm. It doesn't pay for anything. Now, your road tax and your local taxes, that's different. You don't have a Federal Reserve for Texas, although I'm sure they'd love that. But the Federal Reserve is for the Fed.
But we're also one of the only states that's not broke, as a sidebar. So we managed to figure out how to keep our money and make it work for us. So
now, isn't there? I don't think we're gonna have time to talk about Civil War, but isn't there a special dispensation for Texas? Because all the other states in the union, all other 49 states are whole and severin. They're wholly and severally party to the debt of the federal government. So if you want to pull one, if one state wants to secede, you can do that, but you're going to have to pay off the federal debt. Yeah. And if you can do that, then well, that's it. But doesn't Texas have a rider that says that because it was a country first, it doesn't have to?
Yeah. Not only that, we have our own power grid and our own water supplies. So should the day come when we just get tired of all this nonsense, you absolutely can guarantee you that they're going to secede. I think it's just a matter of time. So I make sure and keep my, my Texas birth certificate at hand when I have to travel at all, because you just never really know when that day is coming. So I want to make sure I have my passport to get home. So if I needed to, and that's how I look at it. Right. So, while I love living in California, I think it's really fun. My saying is sort of Texas gives me roots and California gives me wings, and I need both things.